everyone, this is Loralyn. Welcome back to the STEERus Weekly Grind. And we're really lucky today, well, we are every Thursday because we have awesome guests, but this week's guest, Dr. Bui, is not only the Chief Medical Officer of 2 Days Mood, where he's got a really deep analytical insight into what's going on in corporate culture with respect to physician burnout and just dysfunction within hospitals and other clinical settings, and an analytical way to be able to show the causality behind that. That's one thing he does. We're also really lucky at STEERus because he's an advisor in our healthcare vertical. So with that, hi Hieu, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, and I'm really excited to kind of like talk about some of the things we're doing and just to catch up with you, see how everything is going. And I'm looking forward to our little small chat today.
Well, I want you to have a chance to talk to our audience here a little bit about all the work that you do in human capital, because you bring in an analytical perspective that you don't normally see. It's not just the touchy-feely, what's going on, how are you feeling? Yes, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, I'm overwhelmed by the patient load, but you really get into what's going on behind it. Can you talk to our audience about that?
Well, I think it's important that, what you mentioned was about the human resource aspect or human capital. Is a lot of times they kind of fall into the umbrella of like feel good initiatives, and until we start to quantify some of these things like engagement, burnout, or any of these things, we have to translate that into a measurable number. And then once the numbers are measured, we start to analyze these numbers and what they mean, and then how they affect the business impact. So it's like defining the purpose of what you're trying to measure. And then once you measure it, it's important that you try to understand what the business impact of that measurement is. So that's a whole human capital, is that people metrics are important, but we hardly ever measure them. And so we really don't understand what the outcome of the business is like because we don't measure them. It's hard to manage something that you don't measure.
And if we talk about, like, one of the questions that we always ask all of our guests is what they're hearing about with respect to employee struggles. And, not to kind of like jump the punchline and steal it from you, but physician burnout, even nurse burnout as well, and compassion fatigue. Can you talk to us what's going on like in the hospitals from someone who's there and really hearing about it beyond what we see in the news?
Well, it's just not one factor. It's a multi-factorial situation in regards to physician burnout today. And then, one of the things, the core things we always get back to, whether it's physicians, nurses, or anybody that's working today, is the meaning of and the purpose of work. Why do we do the work we do today? And I think that's kind of like shifting in demographics and how we're seeing it kind of like play out in the real world today. Is that as we get shifting in the demographics of workers, as more millennials and Gen Z become the dominant workforce, it's going to be more important than ever today for organizations to provide employees with that purpose and why they come to work every day. And I think that's the missing ingredient. As a result, we're seeing that play out today with high turnover, people resigning and quitting, because a lot of times employees, whether it be doctors, nurses, or any other employees today, the one thing that holds us all together is why the heck we do what we do today when we go to work. So why do we go to work? What meaning does it play in our life? So I think that's going to be all crucial together, is that moving forward, organizations or companies are going to have to provide that purpose and show the employees why they matter and why they come to work every day. And it's just not just to collect a paycheck. So we got to do a better job of providing that purpose, that personalized purpose, and why you do what you do today.
And I had heard this a few weeks ago, this whole Great Reshuffling, and I've really been thinking about it a lot. I still haven't gone back to look at who originally said it, but to give them credit. But in the Great Reshuffling, it's not just the bodies that are moving around, that I'm switching from this job to this job, but it's a great reshuffling of our priorities, our values, really taking that time to look in. People, for the most part, in 2020, when COVID, the onset began, started to say, okay, wait, I've got to pause. I've got time. People cleaned out their closets. They did this. They did projects that they hadn't done in a long time. Like, hey, I wanted to write a book. I wanted to start a business. I wanted, and then now since then, I think it's taken some time. Things have percolated and kind of People have sat with things and ideas for a while. And now this whole reshuffling of, what do I want? Who do I want to be with? Is this the spouse or partner I really want? I've changed my mind on that too. Like, everything's up in the air. And have you heard and seen this kind of thing coming forward in your data as you're looking at the, the patterns and some of the causality behind the burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, getting back at the different demographics of data and who's behind all this great reshuffle, you see it's actually very driven by the younger generation with the millennials and Gen Z. And, if you understand about demographics attributes of, like, every generation has different value system, whether it be baby boomers, Generation X, they have value systems that are different. They might define their identities more through work. Millennials and younger generations might not so much. They find work to be a part of their life, but it's not the identity. And so they have things outside of their life. So I think the pandemic has allowed time for people, like I said, to kind of like refigure things out. Like, what, again, getting back to what we talked a lot earlier, is the purpose and the meaning of work. And it's not just about a paycheck. They want to, and it's important to understand the value system, because millennials are different. They want transparency in their organization. They want work-life flexibility. They want social do-gooders of organization. So all these things factor in eventually to say, like, I want to work for this place, or I don't think this is a good organization that I want to work for. So I think getting back to the purpose and meaning of work, and as long as we understand like what value system for every generation, I think we'll be able to get ahead of this. But right now, I think what most organizations are doing is that they're still trying to attract and retain talent based on value systems that work for baby boomers and Generation X, but not so much for the dominant workforce. Millennials and Gen Z, they're very different in how they approach life because of the vast differences in their experience growing up and when they enter the workforce. So it's definitely very important that we understand these different value systems.
And especially this whole, Gen Z, Gen Z that we're in now. I mean, they were born in the era of 9/11, and they are digital natives. They've seen what can happen. They've seen what can go right. They've seen what can go wrong, right? Everything from Arab Spring to this, to that. There's been so many social movements, and you can see their interest in climate change, right? Greta Thunberg, getting behind that and making effort to do whatever you value, putting your weight behind it.
Absolutely. So I mean, it's just very fascinating to kind of like look at the changes. Like I said, I think maybe that was on the minds of baby boomers and Gen X with what's going on today. But I think sometimes it take a little like stimulus and a nidus to kind of like ignite this movement that's going on that we're seeing today. Is that you needed kind of like something that kind of like ignited. And I think the pandemic was the one thing that ignited the whole, like, why do I go to work? What does it mean? Like, there's a lot of like life and death situation that we're dealing with COVID, and then people start to rethink about the meaning of life and why do you go to work, and how that factors into their family life and what matters the most. So,
and now bringing it back sort of full circle to the level of burnout, not only in physicians, but again, in healthcare workers overall. We've seen the imagery where nurses are breaking down, all of the iPads piled up, that was the last way that someone who was dying connected with their family via iPad, hooked up to ventilators and things like that. Absolute huge trauma. You look at the American Nursing Association in July, they polled their members across the US. 41% of nurses said that they will be making a change and either exit clinical care and patient care or retire early, something along these lines. So that's how bad the burnout is. Can you give us some examples of initiatives that through your associations, through the University of South Florida and hospitals and all of the work and consulting that you do, that companies, specifically hospitals, are doing to support their staff in this time of extreme burnout, high levels of self-harm?
I think education is the key to kind of educate employees what the stressors are, and to provide that that trust that they can actually talk to certain people. Obviously, burnout is a situation where you start to lose a sense of what you have negative feelings about what you're doing, but and then purpose. And we talked about a lot of things, but we eventually will have to provide a safety zone where people and employees can come forth and say, hey, I need help, education, to kind of be an awareness of like what's going on with their life, so that they understand like, hey, I can report my mental well-being, and it's not going to cause my jeopardize my work. It's not going to cause me to lose my medical license. It's not going to put me on administrative leave. And so all these things come into play once we, or as in an organization, we can provide that safety aspect where people can come forth with their mental illness or overwhelm or burnout, that it doesn't affect their medical license or their ability to work. I think that goes hand in hand so I think organizations, first off, they have to start with creating that safety culture and trust, and allow people to be able to report and not have any negative consequences of reporting. So I've seen organizations that are working hard to kind of like educating their staff, but also providing that safety area where they can actually report any type of mental. And I think right now, I think some are receiving grants to kind of like bring a greater degree of awareness to different organizations. So it's more of education, but I think once the education part is done, I think we need to kind of like move more sort of actionable action plans to kind of like reduce that. And so I think it starts, lots of times is to start to, educate and, having the soft skills. Soft skills are important to kind of for part of resiliency. And so teaching the staff how to have soft skills in regards to, combating, mental fatigue, and how to just kind of cope with everyday work life stress, so that you have these soft skills. And that'll be important component is that education part, to instill soft skills in order to help combat a lot of the work situations.
And you raised that, and thank you for doing that. Obviously, at STEERus, that is our whole raison d'être, is the focus on education of soft skills. And some of the key ones you brought out are adaptability and resilience, but professionalism, where you set boundaries, accept boundaries, and even emotional intelligence, which is that combination of self-awareness, boundary setting, like I said, confidence, all of these pieces and parts, so that you can say, this is what I need, this is not okay, and be able to come forward and to feel, like you said, in a safe space. Hopefully that's being created by the employers so that they can come forward and get the help that they need. I look at the statistics, and nearly 500 physicians have died by suicide in this year alone, and that's just not okay.
You're right. Yeah, it's troubling statistics, but I think we're gonna have to. It's gonna be, like I said in one of the talks, it's just all hands on deck. It's just not a doctor problem in regards to burnout or nursing turnover or anything that issues with guys. It really is a society problem, because we always talk that in the end, everybody's a patient. So you need to kind of look at this as a problem that needs to be addressed at a national level and as a society, because eventually, if there's enough people that exit the workforce, especially nurses, hospitals are not going to be able to function. And so, and the quality of care will be affected if we have enough nurses leaving the organizations. And like I said, it's really hard to operate a hospital without nurses. So it's going to be more important than ever to, like I said, instill some of the soft skills, fix some of the systemic root causes of burnout, and start to kind of like really take it seriously. Because I think at some point, if we continue to head down the path of ignoring it and not addressing it proactively, we can lose a significant amount of the workforce that I think would be really hard to replenish, especially skilled positions that take a long time to training, certifications to kind of fill that any type of vacancy. It's not like you can just plug somebody off the street. I always tell people that you can be a nurse for the day. It's a very it's a lot time consuming process in order to get where you are with your training and certification, in order to be have the credentials to work as a nurse or a doctor. So
It's right. More than 300,000 nursing positions are open right now, and enrollment in nursing schools has been declining steadily for the last 5 years. So that's a problem, right? How do you fill the gap? So that said, you have an interesting perspective because you straddle academia, commercial and consulting, and the clinical world. So what's your message for educators and trainers?
I think, education and trainers, I think we need to kind of be in tune again with the demographic changes. We need to understand that millennial, Gen Z, and the future workforce is going to be vastly different from the older generation, baby boomers and Gen X. So we need to tailor to them how they study and they learn. And so, obviously with like with social media, we need to kind of like learn how to teach soft skills in regards to how to deal with communication through social media, teaching them scenario-based learning, and then more frequent feedbacks with students. I think that's going to be important because that's one of the few things that millennials always probably say is that they don't get enough feedback in how they're performing, especially with their boss. So I think, same thing applies to trainers and educators, is that more frequent feedbacks of how they're doing through their learning and developing process, to kind of like give feedbacks more frequent, so that there is more ways to improve, and not like towards the very end where the whole process is already done. More frequent in between that cycle when they're learning certain things, that I think we have to provide more frequent feedbacks. I think that's my message.
I agree. Like feedback in the moment, right? When it happens and it's fresh, not 1 year later. Oh, we're looking back and we're doing your performance review. Hieu, we remember back in January of 2021 on that day at the meeting, and you're like, what? Like, I don't even remember that meeting, right? It's a lifetime ago.
That's perfect. That's exactly what happens most of the time with performance evaluations. Why they're outdated and they don't work really that well, because now we're dealing with information that was a long time ago, and you never had a chance to proactively correct it at that time. It's like a child having a child and they do something wrong, you correct it at the moment, not like days later. So it's an opportunity for educators or anybody teaching anybody, you proactively address whatever deficiencies and things at the moment. It's a learning moment and in real time, and not retrospectively look at like how things were not done correctly.
And that's why I love the software by interaction and Teresa and her team, where it's feedback in the moment, it's all digitized, it's data informed. So it's right there, it's scored, it's easy to read, red, yellow, green, anybody can follow it, right? If you're red, that's a problem. And so, you need remediation. Last question. I want you to fill in the blank. The world needs more.
I think today, probably more than any time, is just kindness. I think, in the fast-paced world we live in today, social media and everything else that's going on, I think, I think kindness goes a long way. Being kind and supportive of each other on social media, liking somebody's posts, all these are little tokens of kindness and support for one another. I think it goes a long way. And, like I said, every day, just you're at the grocery store, somebody lets you go ahead of them, just being kind, and you thank them back. And I always tell another person, it's always good to kind of reinforce when somebody is being kind. I think how many times when somebody's being kind to you, letting you go through a line or letting you merge and nobody says anything. So we need to kind of like really enforce when somebody's being kind, because they'll do it again, right? So I think every day we see people do acts of kindness. I think we need to kind of acknowledge those people and say thank you, or like, hey, really appreciate that, because I think that reinforces, that I can be kind and recognized for it, and it works, because when you're being kind and nobody says anything, it really doesn't reinforce the act of kindness. So I think reinforcement of people that show act of kindness I think it goes a long way. But we need more kindness in this world that we live in today. I
agree. Jack Mardak of Oyster, our guest last week, also said that we need more kindness. And I'm also one of those people. So it's so hard to drive in New Jersey, right? It's the Tailgate State. I forget the Garden State. And you can't get in. Everybody's moving 90 miles an hour and nobody lets you in. And every once in a while, someone will let me in so I don't have to do 8 exits. Because of course, in Jersey, you can't
Right.
turn left. It's all the jug handles. You have to turn right to turn left. And so if
Right.
somebody doesn't let you in, you've got 20 miles until your next exit when you can go right to go left again. And when people let me in, I'm one of those people like, oh, thank you, like both hands off the wheel. Thank you,
Right,
thank
right.
you, thank you.
Because you know what?
So
They're
excited.
more likely to do it again because you did that. You
I
keep
hope
doing
so.
it. Right. Every time somebody does something kind, acknowledge it and reinforce that behavior, because I think, that's it's so important to reinforce it.
Yep, I love it. Before we wrap up, any other comments or thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think it was enjoyable. It was great to kind of come on your show and continue to spread the message, what we're doing. And, I hope everybody, has a great day, and, looking forward to the next time we can get a chance to chat again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bui, for being on the show here today and sharing your insights about human capital, what's going on behind the scenes, and for all that you're doing to help identify some of the sources of burnout and what's going on, to really be an intermediary before things go too far for these healthcare workers who've already been through enough on an average day, let alone in a pandemic era, and really trying to point out how they can get help, where they can get help, that they need help, and working to advocate for safe spaces so that they can get the help that they need. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.